Hello, welcome back to the channel. It's me, Emmy the Cat Lady, and you join me here at Point Lookout. So I haven't been here for a little while since we did all the locations and stuff. So continuing our Wasteland Ecology series, we're going to move on to Fallout 3's DLCs that take you to a different kind of biome. I decided not to do anything for Dead Money because it's not really a biome as such, because everything that's there is all kind of manufactured and stuff. So we're here at Point Lookout where there's a lot of kind of interesting stuff going on geologically and ecologically with the environment and things. So it's quite a kind of famous location, this. So it's got quite a long history even before the Great War happened, where the bombs fell. So Point Lookout's a tourist destination. So we've got the Pilgrims Landing Boardwalk. So there's like a Ferris wheel and arcades and all that kind of stuff. So it is a tourist destination, and it's located in St Mary's County in Maryland, and in the real world it's a national park. And it's located at the confluence of the Potomac River and the Chesapeake Bay, as well as there's some other rivers and stuff that kind of get involved. So it's at a point where basically fresh water meets the sea. And it's where the explorer John Smith came ashore. He's pretty famous for having one of the most generic names in existence, but according to the game, it happened in 1612, but in real life, the year is given as 1608. And he basically went back and reported, you know what, I found this place, it's going to be a good spot for a British colony. So Maryland was settled in 1634, and Point Lookout became part of the land that belonged to Leonard Calver, who was the first proprietary governor of colonial Maryland. So it was considered quite a strategic position because it's right on the bay. It's a strategic position. So the British raided it during the American Revolution, when obviously all the war was going on there. And it also has some relevance to the Civil War. So it was a location of a prisoner of war camp. We can visit another one while we're here. I remember where it is. There it is, Turtle Detention Camp. So during the Civil War, there was a prisoner of war camp that was established here that had awful conditions and severe overcrowding. And 3,384 Confederate prisoners died at the camp and were buried in a mass grave. And in the Fallout world, during the Sino-American War, from the 2060s to 2070s, prisoner of war camp was established in the area as well, which is this one here, is called the Turtle Dove Detention Camp. Kind of named after the Arkandove Cathedral that's kind of up there. So they had that, and this is where they interrogated suspected spies until they got the information, or they killed them, or both. And because of all of these things, the locals became really quite mistrustful of the government and of people working for the government and things. Even though there was something of a military presence here, there was a recruitment centre at the main boardwalk and stuff. It's very misty day to day in Point Lookout. So the climate here is quite different compared to what we see in the base game. Well, that was a bit spooky. It's the noise of whatever that was, crickets or something, that just went quiet. That was a little bit spooky. Right, let's go back to Pilgrim's Landing. So they basically rejected a disaster relief outpost that was disguising government monitoring of people, but this was all in the wake of the new plague, which was becoming a serious problem. and that plague is what led to the creation of the FEV virus and everything that resulted from that. So, you know, kind of very interesting, complicated history here. Oh, small rats. I was like, what is that? It's small rats. And it meant that the locals really, you know, they attacked one of the volunteers at the camp, which is that little pile of tents over there is the camp, and all that kind of thing. And this area didn't take any direct hits from nuclear bombs, but a lot of radioactive fallout made its way here via the Potomac from Washington, D.C., and it has seeped into the land and is quite pervasive now in the area, and we're going to talk about exactly why. So we are in a very different biome to the capital wasteland. The capital wasteland, as we discussed before, is classed as a desert now. It wasn't before the bombs, but because the trees and everything were so badly damaged, the place is basically dried up, so it doesn't really get as much rainfall, which means that plants aren't really able to thrive and grow quite as well. Whereas you can see, we do have quite a lot of kind of grasses and stuff growing here, so there's definitely more functional plant life in this part of the world compared to what we've seen in the capital wasteland. And the reason for that is that Point Lookout is what would be classed as a wetland. There's a lot of different terms that are used for wetlands depending on a number of different features that they have. So you can potentially argue for one word over another word, but the kind of main definition is a wetland is a place where the land is waterlogged, either some or all of the time. So it tends to be, you know, like floodplains or places where, you know, you do have rivers, and you've got a lot of rivers, fresh water. Who's that? Just a smuggler. And the sea. So this part of the world, it's considered an estuary wetland. So an estuary is a point where a freshwater river meets the sea, and that gives us a kind of point where the water gets mixed together. So the salt water and the fresh water are mixed together into what's termed brackish water. So right here, this is what's it called, the delta, something delta. Yeah, the Dove Delta is this bit here. So delta is kind of a piece of land that is sometimes disappears due to like the tide and stuff like that. So we've got the river kind of meeting the sea here, and we get this kind of brackish water that is kind of salty but not as salty as the sea. So we get that kind of mixture, and then when we go further up into, you've got the swamp area. Again, that's a location where there's a lot of water in the ground, and that, you know, gives it a completely different sort of texture, and the kind of plants and things that can live there are affected by that as well. So we can head. Yeah, so you can kind of see it on the map here. You can see up here, it's all kind of yeah, there's some of the locals there. We'll get to them shortly. But yeah, so this is what we would classify as a swamp. So we've got reeds, and we've got, you know, there is still some trees and stuff. We've got some punga fruit. Again, we'll get back to them. But there's obviously a lot of mud and water and things. So swamps are characterised by woody vegetation, so more likely to see trees and shrubs and things rather than herbaceous vegetation, which is plants and flowers that don't have sort of rough bark and have softer stems and things. But you can also see the kind of reeds and other aquatic plants as well. But the plants that live there would be adapted for extremely wet soil, high levels of water, and some of them for the kind of brackish water where the salt water gets mixed in and things as well. So that's the kind of thing that you would expect to find, and that's what we do typically see here. Because you can see there's obviously a lot of kind of trees and stuff around. And then you've got the sacred bog, which I don't think we're too far away from, are we? Yeah, let's facing the right way, because sometimes I find that the custom map marker in Point Lookout gets a bit weird. Yeah, so you can see the water is radioactive. The water is radioactive there. We've got some bloat flies hanging around. All that. Don't know if you can get back in here. And yeah. Just make our way through this little caverny bit. But yeah, because even here, like you can see the cave walls do have a bit of a shiny quality to them, so suggesting that they are damp. And then, yeah, we've got lots of this kind of stuff here, as well as radioactive water. There we go. So, I say this place is called the Sacred Bog. Whether that's an accurate description, I'm not sure. Bogs are generally wetlands where peat accumulates, and peat is made up of dead plant material, particularly mosses. Notably, sphagnum moss is one of the more common ones to see, and that's one that is sphagnum moss is really, really good at holding on to water like a sponge. You know, it really soaks up a lot of water. It's one thing that a lot of reptile keepers will use is sphagnum moss that helps increase humidity in enclosures for snakes and lizards that do require a higher level of humidity, especially snakes when they're shedding their skin. They need kind of higher humidity, and they often find that having a box with some soaked sphagnum moss makes that shedding process a lot easier for the snake to manage. Because if snakes don't shed properly, then they can start to have problems. I have had to do tail amputations in snakes before because they had a bad shed and it caused constriction of the end of their tail and things. So it is something that's kind of quite commonly used by reptile keepers for that purpose. And peat does have many, many other functions as well. So the kind of difference, there's a couple of differences with different terms here. So marsh tends to be used as a kind of coverall term. Bogs typically are acidic, but they have low levels of nutrients in the soil and in the water, while fens are similar, but the pH level tends to be more basic, so more alkaline. And it's possible that that might be more accurate for Point Lookout, given that we know from the soil survey quest. So there's a quest that involves the USS Ozymandias, which you should probably. Oh no, we'll need to go back through before I can show you it on the map. And it was basically they were doing a soil survey here to see if they could find good sources of biogas to use for fuel, and discovered that there was a lot of lye in the ground, and the reason for that is it's typically associated with mass graves and bodies being buried. Sometimes people will use lye as part of that process to kind of disguise the presence there, but it can be used to determine these things. And lye is obviously, it's alkaline. It kind of, you can kind of grasp that from the name. It's alkaline. So soda lye would be the most common one, which is sodium hydroxide, and that is something that makes the soil and water alkaline. It's kind of like acts like bleach as well, and that's something that has been found in the soil. So it's a quest. It's a little unmarked quest that you can do. I think I have already done it on this one, but yeah, there's a boat somewhere. That's it. Yeah, the USS Ozymandias is part of the sort of soil survey and things, and you can find the samples and all that kind of stuff. Quite an interesting little side quest, and you can learn some of the details. And it was basically they found some mass graves from the Civil War era, and there was a lot of lye in the soil, and that kind of thing. So it would maybe make it more likely to be a fen, but without me actually being able to go in there with some litmus test strips and whatnot, then I can't really say for sure. But whichever term you want to use, whether you call it a swamp, a bog, a fen, a marsh, the ecosystem in this kind of location does reflect a combination of terrestrial and aquatic life, which often results in kind of a unique range of species living there. The plants need to be able to handle waterlogged soil, so like, for example, you're not going to see any kind of cacti or succulents here because it's too wet for them. They're equipped for drier, lower rainfall land, while the plants that are grown here and the trees have adapted to that excess water and been able to kind of filter out the nutrients and things. And they also need to be able to handle potentially higher salinity, so higher levels of salt in the water, because we're sitting on an estuary where the river meets the sea, that there's going to potentially be more salt water for them to contend with. And again, there's a lot of plants that don't really like that, but there are also plants that have adapted to cope with that kind of water and thrive in it. So you do get quite a interesting mix, and you can also expect the same with the animal life. So fish and amphibians are very common. You'll find your waterfowl and your wading birds. Small mammals like voles. Voles are rodents, but they tend to be a bit more kind of aquatically inclined than other small rodents. So you'll find them living in like riverbanks and stuff like that. Aquatic insects, dragonflies, various, other kind of flies that lay their eggs in water. Mosquitoes can be prone to that if it's warm enough as well. And you're also looking at crustaceans and mollusks, so the fact that there is mirelurks present here is not a huge surprise. And wetlands are very important from a kind of global point of view as well. So they're very important to the global ecosystem, and the reason for that is that they have a big role in the carbon cycle and act as what's called a carbon sink. So what that means is that they capture and store CO2, so carbon dioxide, from the atmosphere and kind of hold on to it essentially, so it's taking it out, and that's reducing the greenhouse gases, which helps mitigate the climate change. Is one of the things about that and about the excess CO2. So trees do also take in CO2, but planting more trees isn't necessarily enough on its own, and there is evidence that restoring wetlands that have been drained does actually improve carbon capture efforts and could help us mitigate the effects of climate change, which are real and they are happening, and it is something that we probably should be doing more about than we actually are. But they are looking at restoring some of these kind of marshes and swamp areas to help with carbon capture and reducing the CO2 in the atmosphere that's contributing to all the changes that we're seeing in the world. So, need to talk about water, which is definitely not in short supply, as you can see from where we've been wandering. We do also have the creepy doll head totems here, but there's water everywhere. I wouldn't say it was necessarily the healthiest. It is irradiated, but also quite stagnant potentially. So if this was real life and not just a game, I would not be drinking that, not without putting some iodine in it at the very least. But obviously, by definition, the swamp does have a lot of groundwater, and being coastal means that there is potentially some tidal nature to the water levels, that when the tide comes in, that the water levels rise, and then when the tide goes out again, they drop. And we do also have that brackish water and the salt water present, and we have talked about that before, that drinking seawater is not good for you and will actually make you more dehydrated because there's too much salt in seawater for your body to cope with. Same goes for brackish water generally. It's still just a bit too much salt, and your body is going to make you sick, and then you're going to lose more fluid, so it actually is counterproductive. So something to bear in mind. There is also higher rainfall here, especially because there is more groundwater and because it's coastal, that water evaporates and then it's going to fall as rain. So naturally, we are just going to have more rainfall in this place. But one thing to bear in mind is that water in this kind of environment will be hard, and what that means is that it's got high dissolved mineral content. So usually consisting of calcium carbonate, calcium bicarbonates, calcium sulfates, and magnesium carbonates, bicarbonates, and sulfates. And these are what cause limescale in appliances that use water, so electric kettles, water heaters, coffee machines, irons, all those kinds of things that you use. I have to say, it's not something that I've personally had much experience dealing with. Limescale isn't a huge problem here in Scotland. Our water's very soft, and pretty much everywhere. But I know a lot of parts of England do have harder water, and they do then have to, descale their kettles and things regularly to keep them in working order, because it's basically just the minerals just kind of build up on the pipes where the water's moving through, and it can become a problem. But softer water also foams better with soap, and in general does seem to be better for your hair and your skin and your clothes. So if you're in a hard water area, then it can potentially be causing damage to the fibres in your clothes, meaning that they don't necessarily last as long unless you use stuff that can help kind of mitigate the effect of the hard water on your washing machine and all that kind of stuff. So, not necessarily the most important thing when you're trying to survive, but it is something to be aware of, is that, the water here is more likely to actually have higher levels of dissolved minerals, and it's all irradiated as well. And all that radiation, it's become quite insidious because it's come from the water and it's flowed down the Potomac, and that's basically carried all here from Washington, D.C. And that's probably why we don't see quite as many kind of mutated creatures, but we do still see some, because, as we know, the gullification process, especially becoming feral gulls, that can happen very quickly, but it can also be something that happens over time. So, constant low level exposure to radiation can cause that to happen as well, which fits with what we see in the Point Lookout DLC. We do see a bunch of creatures. So we're going to talk now about the food chain and everything. So I have put together a little diagram for this one. It'd be quite a bit smaller because there's not really a massive number of things here, but I'm going to put that together. I've got that together for you guys, so we're going to switch screens and we'll go through it. Here we go. So this is the updated diagram that covers everything that we find in Point Lookout in terms of the food chain. So there's plenty of plant life here, and most of it is trees and shrubs and the sort of grasses and reeds that aren't really edible for humans. And there's not really a lot of herbivores around that can make use of it as well. The mole rats are present, and they are herbivores, so they tend to, because they live underground, it's usually kind of roots and stuff that they would eat. The usual suspects are here. We're coastal, so mirelurks are present, but we do also have new varieties, the swamp lurks and the swamp lurk queens. They can spit like acid at you, kind of like the feral gull reavers can, and a little bit like the mirelurk queens in Fallout 4, but not quite as aggressive, but they can spit, so they do have a long distance attack to be wary of. I don't know what that was. I don't know if you guys caught, if that microphone caught that, but it sounded like something just exploded outside. Just gonna ignore it and hope it goes away. But yeah, so we've got the mirelurks and things. There are kind of wild dogs around as well, or bloatflies, radroaches, and fungus and things. Obviously, there will be bacteria and yeasts and all that kind of stuff for breaking down all the dead things, as well as bloatflies and radroaches, which tend to eat dead things too. There are kind of, in inverted commas, normal humans that are known as the marsh folk, and then you've got the swamp folk who are mutated. You can see especially the big brawly ones have got like thickened arms and things like that. So they are still people. They're not feral. They're not completely mindless or anything. They're just a little bit xenophobic. I really wish I knew what that noise was that's happening outside. So, they're very xenophobic. They'll tolerate the marsh folk, the people that live there, but they are going to be hostile to you. And they're not the easiest to take down. They're quite tough. And we do also have evidence of the swamp folk showing cannibalism. So, you can find them carrying human flesh, and if you go to the Trapper's Shack, which is one of their kind of bases essentially, you will find a strange meat pie, and if you don't know, strange meat pie is made of people, so wouldn't really recommend eating that. Cannibalism is bad. I'm sure we can agree on that. Um, but we do also have the there is feral ghouls. I thought I'd deleted the feral ghouls. Never mind. I'll just put you there, and you can just get deleted. And you, there we go. So yeah, so we've got our feral ghouls, and then the swamp ghouls, which are paler. They tend to be a bit weaker than even your kind of standard feral ghouls. So they're not usually a huge concern, but they can be found in numbers in some places. So it's something to bear in mind when you're adventuring through Point Lookout. I have left the Yaguai on here, but there is only one present, and she's not native to the area, so it's Ruzka, and she has a lair that's up in the northwest corner of the map in Point Lookout. And you can see posters all over the place as well of Ruzka the Wonder Bear, and she was a circus bear, essentially, so you can find her lair, and she's got her big red ball, and she became ghoulified because the Alguai are ghoulified bears, and she's just stayed there. It doesn't really seem like she goes out of her way to hunt for humans, but if you stumble into her lair, then she is likely to take a chance on if she can take you down. I like to just leave her alone because rather that she just lived her own life. So not quite as many, kind of dangerous creatures. There is one unique food item here, which is the punga fruit. So I've never really been able to figure out what it's supposed to be based on, but it's obviously this plant that produces these fruits that are quite popular and seem to be quite nutritious. So they do actually export the punga fruit to the capital Wasteland. So that's why you can find it there, and merchants often carry it because it's a rad scrubber, so it removes radiation from your system as well as giving you hit points, and that's an effect that you see in the game as well. So, if you actually consume the punga fruit, then your rads will go down and your HP will go up, which is quite a nice thing because there's not a lot of things other than Radaway that do that. And the refined variety, so this one's the wild one. It's got a bit more of a kind of brownish looking skin, while the refined ones, which they have at the cathedral, the cult people are growing them, and they look a bit cleaner and they are more effective as well. And of course, if you've followed the plotline for Point Lookout, you know that there's the Mother Punga and the Sacred Bog, and her seeds have a sedative capability that acts like an anaesthetic, which allows a certain person to do a little bit of brain surgery on you while you have wacky dreams. It's quite a fun little it's quite a fun little process that I do like that section of Point Lookout. Where you see like all the random stuff, and it's all reminders of stuff that you've done on your journey and things. It's great. But it's a useful food item because it does remove the rads and also makes decent moonshine apparently as well. And in terms of apex predators, I say a lot of the big guys aren't here, so your Deathclaws aren't present, the super mutants aren't present, I say Yaguai aren't present in significant numbers, there's only one. So that kind of puts humans back up at the level of being an apex predator as well, because we're more likely to eat the other things than they are to eat us, that kind of thing. So that's kind of interesting. But we do know that the swamp folk do engage in some cannibalism as well. And Ruska technically counts, but she tends to just stay in her little area, and she'll only attack anything that gets too close to her. But the swamp folk definitely count because they are very tanky. They're very difficult to fight. The Point Lookout does add a bit of challenge to the combat, especially if you go as a higher level character. I don't know that they did it in the best way because they at this point they were still adding challenge by giving the enemies more hit points and more defense to make it difficult, which is Not necessarily the best way, in my opinion, because it just means that you end up just using more bullets and it takes longer rather than it being necessarily more tactically challenging or anything like that. But that's kind of what they did. So they are definitely tough enough that you do need to be prepared if you're going to go venturing into the swamps of Point Lookout. But as always with these DLCs, the fact that, they're taking us to a different place, they're taking us to a different biome, there's different creatures, there's different challenges, different items to find as well. I say the punga fruit is a really interesting one to me, and the fact that, they've obviously, people have gone there and realised, oh, hang on a minute, this stuff's really good, it's reducing radiation levels, and so they've cultivated it and they've started selling it, and then it does lead to a little bit of a trade between different locations in the wasteland, because they are exporting this stuff and sending it to the capital wasteland, and people there are selling it. So it kind of restarting a little bit of that kind of economy, which is something that doesn't really happen as much anymore because we're in a post-apocalypse. Traveling long distances across the country isn't really as feasible anymore, and especially, like, to access Point Lookout from the capital wasteland, you basically have to go by boat, because going on foot is just not really feasible. But we are seeing that there is a budding kind of economy and trade that's happening in the background and things, and it just all makes the world feel a bit more interesting, and a bit more kind of complicated, which is never a bad thing in my opinion. But that's kind of the ecology of Point Lookout. I say it's definitely one of the most interesting DLCs. I really enjoyed it. The pit as well, which is, I'm pretty sure that's, yeah, next on my list is the pit. So next Saturday, that's where we're going to be visiting. Which is another place. Again, it's all very different because while it is more urban, I think there's some very interesting factors there from an ecological standpoint to talk about. Dead money is a bit different, just because, like, the fog is artificial and there's not really much in the way of living things other than rad roaches there and the ghost people. But I will be digging into some of the stuff around dead money at some point, because again, there's a lot of kind of fascinating stories and history there that I think would be really interesting to dig into. So that's me signing off for today. Thanks very much for watching. I know I had a really good response to last week's video, which was amazing. So thanks to all the folk that commented and liked, and everybody that has subscribed. Hopefully you'll continue to enjoy the videos I put out. And I'll catch you guys next time. Bye.